Hi everybody, Adam Steele from Hot Pole Studios here, and today we're going to talk about the brand new 2019 iMac that just came out and compare it to some PC alternatives, because I'm beginning to wonder how far down the slope Apple have gone in terms of making machines that are good for audio production, which is what we do here. Let's roll the credits and then let's get going. So I'm hoping not to make this too long a video today, because this isn't going to have changed much from last year, really. But I wanted to talk specifically about Mac versus PC and these brand new iMac models that have come out. For any of you that are die-hard Apple fans or die-hard PC users, this video is probably not going to be much use to you, because if you've got one platform that you prefer, fine, cool. And I don't think I'm going to sway you either way. I'm going to take these headphones off because I'm not using the sound from them for the rest of this video. I am at home in my home studio today. If you see any of the regular videos that we produce, you'll see me in my full studio. But this is just something that I literally got the email about today, about the new iMac. So I thought, okay, let's have a look. One thing I've noticed that's very subtle is at the bottom here, the entire thing seems to be either vents or intakes, which is quite a good thing. A lot of the main site for the iMacs, it's all marketing fluff. So first thing we're going to do in this video is look at some of this and try and cut through some of the marketing crap. Then what we're going to do is spec out a really good iMac for audio production. Then we're going to look at the cost of it. Then we're going to see if we can use the part picker website to make a PC that's really high quality and as good, if not better, for the same money or less. So, without further ado, that's all marketing rubbish. Retina display. I will give Apple this. Their displays are really nice. There are competing displays in terms of quality, I think, now, where a few years ago there probably weren't. And that's something where a lot of the monitor industry has looked at what Apple's doing and gone, you know what, we can do that. And in fact, as far as I'm aware, Apple don't make their own panels for the monitors. They are supplied by somebody else. So why would that somebody else not make the panels for themselves? So there's the 21.5-inch Mac and the 27-inch. Now, if you're into audio production, you're probably going to want a lot of screen real estate. You're going to want to be able to see a lot of tracks, faders, plugins all at once. I've always found the more I can see at once, the faster I can work, because I'm not clicking through screens. Having said that, out of the two choices here, the only one I would recommend, even if you were an Apple hardcore fan, if you're going to be an audio producer, is the 27-inch, for several reasons, and the screen is one of those, because you don't want to be squinting, you want to be able to see everything in really high detail. They start going on about nits and brightness and colours. Great, nobody really cares. Now this is where it gets interesting. The blah 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 marketing bump. The 21.5-inch up to 60% faster CPU. Okay. The previous models were a 4-core processor, and now they're 6. I'll take that. And of course, that would give you an extra 50%. And then there's the incremental kind of 10% every generation improvement. Fine. The 27-inch up to 2.4 times faster. Why, Apple, are you using percentage for one and times for the other? Why? That seems intentionally misleading. And the reason that the 27-inch is so much faster is because you can have an 8-core processor in there, but not without paying a lot of money, which we'll get into shortly. And up to 80% faster graphics in the 4K one, and up to 50% faster graphics in the big one. And the up to is if you pay extra, and compared to probably the worst version of the previous models. So here we get, the 6-core and 8-core versions. If you're into gaming, I mean, you're probably not going to buy a Mac anyway, but more than maybe 4 cores, possibly 6, isn't going to help you at all. For audio production, which is what we do here, the number of cores can have quite a significant impact, depending on what you're doing. If you're running a relatively simple project, maybe you've only got 4 or 5 tracks on it, but they've got an absolute ton of processing. So let's say you're using some of the most complicated synthesizer plugins with all the compressors and EQs and stuff on the same channel, then having more cores isn't going to help you, because the way that digital audio workstation software works is that each channel is treated as a thread, which means that is processed, so each effect on there has to be done one by one in a row by the same processing kind of thread. Whereas if you've got a big project with, I don't know, 80, 100 tracks going on, more cores is going to be a good thing, because a lot of your channels can then be distributed across, and the more cores that you give it, within reason, if you give it 1,000 cores, that would not help, but that would mean that the load of the processing could be split fairly evenly. The way that audio workstations tend to work is, especially if they're designed well, and Reaper, my favourite, is great for this. If you had 100 tracks of audio going all at once, and let's say that the amount of processing needed for each one was about equal, then if you had an 8-core processor, then Reaper could go, okay, U15 go on this core, U15 go on that core, and when you've all done that little piece of processing, come back to me with the result, I'll add them all together. Then any master processing will then be done on one of the cores, and that will be spat out and sent through your interface so you can hear it. And so, within reason, the more cores you have, the better efficiency you're going to get out of your machine. So, that's great. What I have to worry about is little details, which I'll come back to again, where the 21-inch Mac has up to 6-core, 8th generation Intel Core i7 processor, and the 27-inch has an up to 8-core, 9th generation processor. The issue I have is that the 9th generation Intel processors have been out for a while, and that's the generation we are on. Why are Apple, or any manufacturer for that reason, trying to sell us old hardware as a new machine? It's like trying to sell me a year-old car as this year's model. It's not right. It's misleading. It's mismarketing. I mean, it's not mismarketing legally speaking, because they're telling you what they're selling you, but it just feels dishonest. Now, there's some nice little graphs here of higher sculpture track count, that kind of thing, which is to say if you do a lot of synth stuff, Logic Pro is going to be more efficient, which was exactly what we were talking about. If you do any graphical editing, well-threaded filters, they always qualify these with the kind of the most appropriate thing that they hope that's what you do with that software. Final Cut Pro, specific examples for the percentages, which, okay, fine, they have to be specific, but I do kind of worry. Graphics, iMac features robust new Radeon Pro 500X series. Now, the 500 series is not new, it's several years old at this point. The Radeon 570s and 580s were used in all the crypto mining rigs, all the crypto stuff, which came and went last year and the year before. These graphics chips are not new. And then somewhere... Oh, and then the 27-inch is loaded with up to 8 gigabytes of dedicated VRAM. Okay, but that's separate from what the graphics card actually is. And, for even greater graphics performance, Vega GPU is available, which is great. AMD's Vega is their top-of-the-line graphics card series, which they've had some production issues with because of the way they're made. The prices on them are very expensive because the graphical memory for those is actually on the same chip as the graphics, rather than being two separate things that talk to each other, which means that the performance is really quite impressive, but the cost is quite high. And they give you some big percentages here, which they don't mention the Radeon 500X at all. This is all... Ooh, yeah. So here we go. 6-core iMac with Pro Vega 20, which is kind of a knockdown version in the smaller iMac, compared to a quad-core iMac, so less CPU, with Radeon Pro 560, which will be the previous generation, Pro 560. That's a 500 series, which tells you the previous generation of Macs was using these graphics cards, which they're trying to advertise here. That's, again, not right. I mean, it's not wrong, but it's not morally right. Final Cut Pro, 3D rendering. Of course, they're giving you numbers that look bigger, because if you're going to spend that money, of course it's going to go faster. This is more powerful hardware. Okay, so up to 3TB Fusion drive or up to 2TB SSD, marketing bump. Built-in tools, yeah, it's OS X, it works with iPhones, none of this is new. The design is exactly the same as it's been for years. Blah, 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 blah. 5mm thin at its edge, but we don't look at it from the edge, so nobody cares. At least not in audio production anyway. No one hears how thin your computer is at the edge. It's very well connected, yeah, it's got an SD card slot, so is my laptop. It's got a headphone jack, which is rare for Apple. 4 USB 3 sockets, which for a professional workstation isn't enough, in my opinion. Thunderbolt 3, fine, I'll give you that. I will give you that one. A lot of PCs don't have Thunderbolt, and if you need Thunderbolt, there are Windows computers that do that, but if you're desperate for Thunderbolt, Mac may well be the way to go. And Gigabit Ethernet, fine, cool, yes, okay. Marketing, connect some extra displays, cool, which is something that I'm doing right now. I use 2 displays on my machine, although I actually run 2 1080p displays with no issues. Keyboard and mouse, fancy, yes. Alright, find the right Mac for you. If you hit compare, you don't get to buy them, it goes to the comparison screen. So, let's go to buy and see what we're looking at in terms of pricing. So, like we said, we're not going to even look at the 21-inch Mac, we're going to look straight at the 27. So there are 3 choices here, kind of bottom, middle and top. And they're £1,750-ish to £2,250-ish. If you're in dollars, times it by 1.5 roughly, maybe a little more, that'll give you a rough kind of price. Having said that, the import taxes and all that kind of thing, you're probably looking at a bit less than that if you're in the US. But then you've got sales tax to add on top, which we in the UK don't. The price that we see is the price we pay. So there is that. Now, we, as audio guys, need fast processors more than anything. Graphics card isn't really relevant to us necessarily, but the CPU really is. So, these are like from prices. The actual price is not like this. So, the 6-core, 6-core, so by default these are all 6-core, so all the 8 cores that they've been advertising in the marketing isn't even in any of these pricing structures, it's customize only. So that's not great. Now, the bottom and middle tiers are the 8th generation processors, and the top one is the 9th generation processor. Why are they not all the new ones? Is this because Intel have some massive stock that they need to shift and they've given them to Apple at some discount price, which we're not going to see the benefit of? I suspect so. And so, let's click select on the top one because this has a 2TB Fusion drive by default, 8GB of RAM by default. That's shocking. There are phones with more memory than this. So why by default are you giving us something that can barely load your own operating system? In 2019, for me, 16GB of memory is the sweet spot. 32 if you're future-proofing and going a little bit overkill, or if you do a lot of graphics work. But 8 is not enough. Memory's kind of like a bucket. If it's too small, everything overflows. But if you get bigger and bigger and bigger, that doesn't actually help unless you're doing something crazy, because it just doesn't make things go faster. Anyway, let's hit select on this top one. So let it load up. So there are two choices on this processor to start off with: 3.7 gigahertz 6 core, or 3.6 gigahertz 8 core. Now the 8 core is going to be significantly more powerful for what we do as audio producers, so I'm going to have to click that, but that adds £360 on top. Memory, like I was saying, 16 is the absolute minimum, and that adds £180 on. Woof. You know what, let's go crazy again and put 32 in. It's more than we need as audio producers, but I'm going to go ahead and assume that you're going to be doing things like running 200 tabs of Google Chrome whilst doing video editing, whilst having Logic or Pro Tools or Reaper open. 64 is absolute overkill. I was doing some heavy After Effects processing work on this computer that I'm on earlier. This has 32GB of RAM and it was using most of it, but any more than that on an extreme example is just overkill and not worth the extra money. Anyway, oh look, by default, the Radeon Pro 58TX comes by default. If we want to move up to Vega, which is Vega 48, which has 48 of their processing units on, which by the way is less than their dedicated graphics cards, the Vega 56 and 64, which have been out for quite a while now, that's an extra 400 and something pounds. Woof. Now the Fusion drives are actually a small solid state drive with a regular spinning drive. So let's go all solid state. That's something I've already done in the studio. And let's go crazy and say it's 2TB to make sure that all our files are there. Make sure you regularly back up your machine, guys, by the way. Regularly back up everything to several places, which is something I'll talk about in another video. I'll leave the trackpad and mouse and everything as is. I'll assume you've already bought your software. If not, that's an extra expense, but that's not going to be involved in what we're going to do. So the price for that is £4,500. That's insane. Well, maybe it's not insane, but it's a lot of money. And the thing I worry about is by throwing all this extra high-spec hardware in there, I'm not sure we're going to see too much of the benefit. Not because the hardware isn't good, but because of heat. Heat is a major issue in high-performance computers. Heat is generated by having these really powerful machines and doing really intense work, which if you're working on a 100 or 200 channel count project, that's a lot of work. That means that the process is going to do a lot of work, is going to get hot, and that heat needs to go somewhere. When your machine has 5mm thickness at the edges, which means that because of the rounded back, there's nowhere for the heat to go, it's all got to be ejected out quickly, which means that the fans inside are going to have to be really fast, which means it's going to create a lot of noise. Now, I am running a laptop right now, which is about 1 inch thick, and that's trying to do all this streaming kind of stuff, and that's got the fans running a bit, which you might be able to hear in the background. But for a laptop, I'll accept it. I understand. I get it. A laptop is designed to be thin because you're picking it up and you're moving it around. With a desktop computer, that's not a thing. You're not picking it up and putting it in your lap. That's literally the point of a desktop machine, is that it sits on the desk. So for me, the iMac that was just over 1 inch thick, which had proper cooling inside, was kind of the peak of the design, because functionally it did what it needed to do. It got loads of air in, it threw all the heat out without making a lot of noise. Now, you'll come back to me and say, oh, but the iMac's really quiet, really quiet. Yeah, when you're not doing anything intense. As soon as you get to doing those big projects, you listen for those fans. And I mean, you don't even have to listen very hard, because very quickly you will know it will hit you right in the face. Ooh. Getting loads of emails through from Two Notes, because my new series of cabinets are being processed right this minute. Ooh, exciting. Anyway, that is a lot of money. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and build a PC with a large 4K monitor and peripherals that performs as good as this, if not better, deals with heat better, and probably runs near silent, and see if it costs the same or if it costs less. Now, I know what the result is going to be there, but... Oh. Part Picker. PCPartPicker.com. So this is PC Part Picker. I'm going to make a list of components here, and at the end we'll even talk about if there is a price difference, because it's all separate components, someone building it for you, which will add a cost on. And so let's come to that in a minute. So let's start a system build. So the first thing that we're going to do, let's do it in the list that order that they suggest. So we're going to choose a CPU. So the 9th generation Core i9 is what we're looking at. So to know it's a 9th generation, the first number of the 4 numbers is going to be a 9. 9th generation. So in this list, we've got Core i9 9900K. So 3.6, 3.6, it's that. It's a Core i9 9900K. So that's what we're going to add to our build. They're not cheap. That's fair. I can see why Apple would have to charge for that, because that's the latest. In terms of consumer grade processors, there is another class above called high-end desktop, HEDT, and then there's server grade, but the prices skyrocket for those kind of things. Those are the kind of processors where you say, I have a nearly unlimited budget, I just need this to be the most powerful thing it can be now, so here's my money, let's go. Whereas what we're doing is we're going to the high end of the consumer grade and seeing what we can get. I mean, arguably the high-end desktop stuff isn't really what we would need here anyway. I mean, that would be on par with the iMac Pro, which starts at over £5,000 if I remember rightly. But that's kind of the next class up. So let's choose a CPU cooler to go with this, and I'll just go with the Cooler Master Master Liquid 240L. I was looking at one of these earlier. They're relatively quiet. Let's just open that up as a page. It's one of these, it's an all-in-one design. So it's one of these where this bit goes on the processor itself, and then these two tubes go to this bit, which is attached to one of the sides of the computer case, so that all the heat goes out of it like a little fridge type thing. It's quite a clever design, really. So I'm just going to add that, because that's 240mm, which is a fairly standard size. It's 2 regular fans back to back, and you just bolt that onto the side of the case, which we'll come to in a minute. So, next up, motherboard. So, we're looking specifically for a Z390 motherboard. I'm just going to check that. Yes, so looking on Intel's website, the Z390 is compatible with the i9 9900K. So that is exactly the range that we're going for. Get rid of this. And so I'm going to have a quick look down here. So I'm going to pick one that's relatively expensive. Not because it's expensive, but because... let's have a look at price. Because it's one that I know. Asus, their Z390. I've used, in my previous studio build, the Asus Maximus 8 Hero, which was absolutely rock solid. So the Prime is a step down from that because we're not going to be overclocking. I mean, if you want to overclock, go for it. But, I mean, you wouldn't be overclocking the Mac. So we'll go with this, which will have everything we need on there. So let's choose some memory. So we want 32 gigabytes. Ideally is 2x16, which means we've got 2 sticks of memory to go in there, which leaves space for another 2, but also means that the computer's guaranteed to be more stable, arguably, because it's using less power to do all this kind of thing. So, Corsair Vengeance LPX DDR4 3200 comes up top of the list. And it's relatively inexpensive. For 32 gigabytes of RAM, it's less than 200 quid. Let's see how much Apple were charging us for that. So, from the basic 8 gig, that was an extra £540 from Apple. Or here, it's £189 all told. That's terrifying, the Apple tax difference. So, storage, did we pick? Yeah, we picked the 2TB SSD. So, let's go to storage. SSD, 2 terabyte capacity. Let's look at it backwards. 2 terabyte. Okay, so I'm probably looking for the Samsung Evo 970 Evo. There we go. So the Samsung 970 Evo is an M2 drive, which means it's NVMe, it's, come on, brain. Yeah, prices are dropping on this kind of thing, which is great. And it's currently £400 on Amazon. And this is solid state super fast storage. It's something like 3 gigabytes a second or something stupid like that, which serial ATA SATA is capped out at about 550 megabytes a second. So this is way faster. Let's add to part list. And it's massive, so it's only ever going to be lightning fast. £400, 2 terabyte. Compared to their Fusion drive going up to 2 terabytes, nearly £1,000. So we've already not paid another £500 there and another several £100 on the memory. So, video card. Let's look for something similar to what we already had. So let's look for Radeon Vega. So the Radeon Vega 48 is what we picked in the Mac because there isn't one bigger. So let's go with Vega 56, just for the heck of it, and see how many there are. So what's available? 8 gigabytes of RAM on an MSI RX Vega 56, £250. Add. And that's not cost us an extra £400, that's cost us £250. We need a case, which of course you're not going to need really. NZXT's H500. Let's have a look at that at the top of the list. Looks good to me. It's quite subtle, understated. Will have all the features we need because it's relatively new. Let's add that to the parts list. Okay, so let's choose a power supply. Let's go crazy and choose something that's 80 plus platinum. Because the more efficient your power supply is, the better you're going to save money, and generally kind of the more well supported your parts are going to be. So let's go with, we don't need much in terms of power, even though we've got an 8-core processor and a fairly beastie graphics card. We've only got one graphics card in there and one processor, so the most we need is 550 watts. Let's go with the Seasonic one just to be safe. The Seasonic fully modular, which means it's neater to work with. 80 plus platinum, does 650 watts of power, which we're never going to need. And so, choose an optical drive. No thanks, don't really need one. Choose an operating system. Windows 10 Home 64-bit. Sure, why not? Because you kind of need Windows. Don't need any software. I'm going to assume you've got your own. Choose a monitor. Let's look at monitors here. So we want 3840 by 2160 because we want a 4K display, because the Mac's got a 5K display. We may as well at least get close to that. Let's look at size. So Asus do good monitors, as in my experience. So Asus gaming monitor, 28-inch, so that's larger than the Apple one. 4K, 60Hz. We don't need super fast refresh rate, but that exists if we want it. Let's add that to the parts list. So, peripherals, let's just add a keyboard and a mouse just for the heck of it. And let's not go absolutely bananas. I actually quite like, in terms of basic peripherals, I mean, if you want to spend more, but I like Microsoft's keyboards and mice. I always have. As far as basic stuff, their basic range has always been absolutely solid for me, and surprisingly so. So, Microsoft optical mouse. Anyway, so we don't need any accessories. We got the cooler. We don't need custom parts. Total, including tax and including shipping for everything, is £2,078.54. Now, this is going to be comparative roughly in dollars. I'm going to get rid of that blue thing. So, £2,078 compared to £4,544. That's ridiculous. So even if the keyboard and mouse, if you want to go crazy and get yourself some really nice mechanical keyboard and mouse with 1,000,000 buttons, or like a rollerball, a trackpad, that's not going to cost you £2,500 for those. And because this is a bigger case with more airflow, bigger sticks of memory because they're not the shortened versions, the full desktop processor has a cooler on it that can keep it cool all the time. You can even get coolers for the SSDs. The massive cooler on the graphics is going to keep that cool. The graphics, even as an audio guy, we don't need crazy graphics. If you're never going to do any kind of graphical work, maybe bump it down to like a Radeon 560 or something, which are about £100. Save yourself another 150 quid. Because why not? The only reason that I've thrown that in there, the Vega, is to be comparative to the Mac. And if I was going to do anything like heavy graphical work, then I might consider keeping the Vega. I know that in Premiere and video editing, that kind of thing, they're really quite good at accelerating the rendering. In terms of audio production, it doesn't do any more than the latest like 500 series of Radeon cards, which I'm going to talk about in another video actually very soon. Is I'm going to do Nvidia versus AMD in terms of audio production, because I've been having issues with Nvidia drivers and modern graphics cards, and I'm going to talk about that separately. But I hope this has been interesting for you. I mean, that's another thing, £2,078. Let's say you don't know how to build a computer and you want someone like me, for instance, to build that for you. I might charge you £250 for a full day for me to really take the time to really do that to the absolute nth degree. That would still be less than £2,400 all told for an incredibly powerful machine, compared to the more than £2,000 more expensive Mac. Now, like I said at the beginning, if you're definitely like, I am an Apple guy or I am a PC guy, I was never going to really sway you. But if your goal is to produce music, then it really doesn't matter what platform you're on. What it matters is, can you afford the equipment, and is it going to last a long time to make sure that you can keep doing that job for a long time? which, if you're an aspiring producer, or even if you're a relatively successful producer, I wish you all the best. And I don't care whether you're a Mac or PC guy, I care whether you do what you're doing without obstacles in the way. Because that's always been the biggest problem for me in producing music, is the obstacles that are in my way. Whether it was cheap equipment, or whether it was a computer that wouldn't keep up with me, or whatever it has been, all the money that I have spent over the years on gear, on guitar gear, keyboard gear, microphone gear, computer gear, has never been to say, oh, look at what I have. It's always been because there's been a problem that I've had to try and solve. And I'm not made of money, I'm no millionaire, so for me, if I was buying the most powerful computer that I could really afford right now, I'd be buying one of these and not one of these. Something that I think is worth mentioning is, if a client walked into my studio today or tomorrow and said, oh, you don't have a Mac, I'm not working here, I'm not recording here, they're probably not the kind of client that I would have wanted to work with anyway. And I'm not just saying that to be kind of stuck up or anything, but if an artist, if their priority is what kind of computer I'm using, they're not focused on the music. My sole focus when I'm in the studio is, can I get the best sound possible for this person or group of people? And can I get the best equipment to make the best result? And beyond that, image is immaterial. For me, it's really not part of it. As the studio becomes a little more successful, I am starting to get a few things that visually impress people, but even then, I have to make sure and be sure that that piece of equipment serves a purpose first, because, again, still not a millionaire, not made of money, and I think most of the guys in this industry are in the same boat. If you're on some super high-end studio that's using Pro Tools Ultimate with a full hardware accelerated rig and a full iMac Pro, cool, that's kind of a different world, and that's high-end business. And in high-end business, like I said earlier, you pay whatever money you have to get the top of the line, because then you're charging the clients top of the line money. That's a different world that goes around a different way. But for the rest of us, for us mere mortals, this is the route I would go down. And at some point in the future, I might make a video about a 2019 version of something much more affordable than this. But in the meantime, this is just going head-to-head with that Mac. And in my humble estimation, the PC has more than one. So I hope this has been interesting for you. One thing I want to mention is a big thanks to everybody who helps us out on Patreon, because Patreon is where people can help us out in return for doing stuff like this. It's kind of the equivalent of buying us a beer or that kind of thing, where you can give us a dollar a month, that kind of thing. And that really helps us to keep making videos like this, because it means that we can dedicate time to doing this and not grinding away in the studio with clients. So big thank you to all our current patrons, and thank you to anyone who decides to help us by giving us a dollar or so. In return, you get early access to all these kind of videos, early access to all our tutorials, viewers' comments videos that we do, you get first shout. And that's enough of that sales pitch from me. I've been Adam Steele for Hot Pulse Studios. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.